clips on just like a clothespin. And if you don't mind, if you run it up in the inside of your sweater, then it'll look nicer and you won't have a huge cable going down the front.
Hey.
Perfect. And then just go this way, and I'll. Beautiful. Thank you very much.
You ready? This is the microphone right over there. If you cover, if you're gonna hold it this way, but if you cover this up, then the microphone will work. You're gonna hold it down here. Okay.
Wow, that technology.
Yeah, it's well. So, okay, buddy. Okay. Do you guys want to go up ahead up front?
I forgot to tell
You
you
have to go up.
at the World
Go ahead up on then. Go ahead up. Oh, here's the microphone. The speaker is right over there. Go ahead right up front.
Good morning. My name is Michael Rodriguez, and I am the senior class president. Fellow students and guests, welcome to this very special event. We would like a moment and introduce our guest speaker, who was born in South Africa and is an Indian American social political activist, speaker, author, and agent of change. He is the fifth grandson of the legendary leader Mahatma Gandhi.
Good morning, my name is Najelis and I'm the senior class vice president. Dr. Gandhi is a very popular speaker on colleges, campuses, and has spoken in countries all around the world. He has shared his grandfather's message at numerous museums and organizations, as well as to government officials, including President Clinton. His programs have changed the lives of over more than 500,000 people in over 300 villages in the world, and they still continue to grow.
Be the change you want to see in the world. Good morning, my name is Melanie and I'm the senior class treasurer. Our speaker has committed his life to being the change he wants to see in the world. Dr. Gandhi founded the Gandhi Worldwide Institute, a non-profit organization that works to realize the vision of his historical namesake. The Institute's mission is to help individuals and communities develop the inner resource and practical skills needed to achieve a non-biased, sustainable, just world. The M.K. Gandhi Institute for Non-Bias is located at the U of R. He has several honorary degrees and has participated in notable interfaithful activities. Dr. Gandhi has dedicated his life to continuing the work that his grandfather, Mahatma Gandhi, began. As an author, he was a journalist for 30 years for the Times of India and Washington Post, and has written books such as Legacy of Love, Grandfather Gandhi, and his latest, his latest book, The Gift of Anger. He has been on the bestseller list worldwide and on Amazon. It is my great honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Arun Gandhi. Please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here this morning. And after seeing all these wonderful displays that you have made here, I think you know my grandfather more than I do. So I'm going to share with you a little of what I learned from him. And the two lessons that I think are the most important in my mind. The first lesson is, of course, dealing with anger. We all get angry very quickly and for various reasons every day. And because we are not taught about anger and how to use it intelligently, we are so ashamed of anger. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to teach it. We don't want to learn about it. And so we end up abusing anger. And my grandfather told me that anger is actually a wonderful emotion. It's a very powerful emotion. He used the analogy of electricity. He said it's just like electricity. It's just as powerful and just as useful, but only if we use it intelligently. But it can be just as deadly and destructive if we abuse it. So just as we channel electrical energy and use it for the good of humanity, we must learn to channel anger in the same way so that we can use that energy for the good of humanity rather than abuse it and cause death and destruction. He suggested that I write an anger journal. He said every time you get angry over something, don't act on it, don't say anything or do anything that you're going to regret later on. But write it all down in your journal. But write the journal with the intention of finding a solution to the problem, and then commit yourself to finding a solution. Now that is very important, because a lot of people tell me they've been writing an anger journal for a long time, but it hasn't really helped them, because every time they go back and read the journal, they are just reminded of the incident, and they get angry all over again. So we don't want the journal to be a reminder of the incident. We want the journal to help us find a solution to the problem. So it's important that we write the journal with that intention and then commit ourselves to finding that solution. I did this for many years, and I must say it helped me considerably in learning how to use the energy of anger constructively and intelligently rather than abusing it. Harvard University recently did a study, and they came to the conclusion that more than 80% of the violence that we experience, either in our personal lives or in the lives of our nations, is generated by anger. We get angry and we say things and do things that we regret. Now, if we learn to use anger constructively and intelligently, we would be able to reduce violence very substantially. If we can even cut it down to 50% of what we practice today, it will make a tremendous difference in our lives. But to do this, to be able to channel that energy of anger constructively and intelligently, we need to have control over our minds. And today we don't have any control over our minds at all. I mean, as you are sitting here, you'll find that your mind is filled with a dozen different thoughts, all racing through your mind at the same time. So to that extent, you are not able to focus your full attention to what is going on at this moment. And that is natural, because we have never done any mental exercise. We do a lot of physical exercise because we want a strong body, strong and healthy body. But we have never done any mental exercises for a strong mind. And that's something my grandfather taught me to do. He said, just spend a few minutes every day quietly in your room and hold in front of you something that gives you pleasure to look at. It could be a flower, or it could be a photograph, whatever. Just hold that in front of you for 1 minute. Concentrate your full attention on that object, and then close your eyes and see how long you can keep that image in your mind. In the beginning, I found the moment I closed my eyes, the image vanished, because I didn't have any control over it. But then when I began to do this exercise regularly every day, I found that I could keep that image longer and longer in my mind. And to that extent, my mind was coming under my control. So then, once I get control over the mind, I can focus on whatever I want to do at that moment and not let the mind stray around as it happens every day in our lives today. So it's a very important exercise for all of us to do. It's essential that we have a good, healthy body, but equally essential that we have a good, healthy mind also. So I would suggest to all of you that you should try doing this every day to improve your own lives and stop you from doing something silly that you will regret. The other lesson that I think is very important also is about understanding violence. When we talk about violence today, we only talk about the physical violence because we see it happening all the time, we experience it, we feel it, and we see it. And so physical violence becomes the most important thing that we focus on. Grandfather taught me that there's something called passive violence, something that we all practice every day, but we don't even know about it. And he taught me this lesson through a little pencil. When I was coming back from school one day and I had this 3-inch pencil in my hand, and I thought I deserved a better pencil and threw it away. And I was so sure that Grandfather would give me a new pencil when I asked him for one. But that evening when I met Grandfather and asked him for a new pencil, instead of giving me a new one, he subjected me to a lot of questions. He wanted to know how the pencil became small and where did I throw it away and why did I throw it away and on. And finally he asked me to go out and look for it. And I said, "You must be joking." He said, "You don't expect me to look for a little pencil in the dark?" He said, "Oh yes, I do. He has a flashlight." And he sent me out with a flashlight to look for this pencil, and I think I spent about 2 hours searching for it. And when I finally found it and brought it to him, he said, "Now I want you to sit here and learn 2 very important lessons." The first lesson is that even in the making of a simple thing like a pencil, we use a lot of the world's natural resources. And when we throw them away, we are throwing away the world's natural resources, and that is violence against nature. And the second lesson is that because in an affluent society we can afford to buy all these things in bulk, we overconsume the resources of the world. And because we overconsume them, we are depriving people elsewhere of these resources, and they have to live in poverty, and that is violence against humanity. And that is the first time I realized that all of these things that we do every day, consciously and unconsciously, all that have become so much a part of our daily life that we don't even consider it to be violent, that all these things are acts of violence. And to make me understand this thoroughly, he made me draw a genealogical tree of violence. Just as we do a family tree, with the grandparent and then the parents and so on. So he made me draw a tree of violence with violence as the grandparent and physical violence and passive violence as the 2 branches. And every day before I went to bed, I had to analyze and examine everything that I had experienced during the day. Things that I may have done to other people or people may have done to me, or things that I may have read about. All of that had to be analyzed and examined and put on that tree appropriately. Now, if it was the kind of physical violence that we know about, all the kicking and beating and murders and rapes and wars and fighting and all of these things where physical force is used, that would go under physical violence. But if it's the kind of violence where we don't use any physical force, sometimes we don't even see the other person, but through our actions or inactions, we are depriving that people or hurting that person in some way or the other. And that would be passive violence. And the way I had to determine this was to ask myself, if somebody were to do this to me, would I feel hurt by it or would I be helped by it? And if I came to the conclusion that it would hurt me,
Coming up for period 3, you have 2 minutes to get to class. 2 minutes to get to period 3.
so if you feel that it would hurt you if somebody did that to you, then that would be passive violence. And when I began to do this exercise, and within a few months, I was able to fill up a whole wall in my room with acts of passive violence. The physical didn't grow very much because there's a limit to what you can do physically. But the passive violence grew endlessly. And that is when grandfather explained the connection between the two. That we commit passive violence all the time, every day, consciously and unconsciously. And that generates anger in the victim, and the victim then resorts to physical violence to get justice. So it is passive violence that fuels the fire of physical violence. So logically, if we want to put out that fire of physical violence, we have to cut off the fuel supply. And since the fuel supply comes from each one of us, we have to become the change that we wish to see in the world. If we don't change, if we don't look at our weaknesses and our the way we commit passive violence all the time, we will never be able to bring peace in this world. Which is why we see today the world is divided between the rich and the poor. Almost half of the world lives in affluence, and the other half of the world lives in abject poverty. And as long as we have that kind of situation, we are going to have a lot of violence, we are going to have a lot of crime, and we're going to have a lot of terrorism, and all of these things are going to keep growing because we are not addressing the issue of poverty at all. So poverty is a very important thing that we need to be concerned about, and the only way we can safeguard and be safe in our countries is to ensure that everybody lives safe in their own countries. Today, we have this caravans of refugees coming from Central America. Now, they're not just out for fun or to come and take our jobs or anything like that. Imagine the desperation of people who are willing to walk for 3.5 to 4 months, thousands of miles, carrying their babies and their possessions and coming here. I mean, they're so desperate with all that violence and poverty and destitution that they would rather walk all that distance and come here and seek refuge. So that is going to go on as long as we don't address the issue of poverty all over the world. And that is what we need to do. And that is why, in a small way, I started or helped start this school at Avani, where we have been rescuing children from poverty, who live in abject poverty, and giving them hope by giving them education and enabling them to break out of that cycle of poverty. Now, these are things that all of us can do on a small scale, because eradicating poverty needs a lot of compassion and understanding. And compassion and understanding can come only from people like you and me. It cannot come from governments. The governments have a very bureaucratic approach to all the problems, and they can't do this except provide money for it. But otherwise, we have to take the initiative, and we need to do something to help people in living in destitution or poverty, even if it is within our own neighborhoods. we need to do things that we can improve their lives so that they can be, reasonably safe and in good condition. So these are things of nonviolence that all of us need to understand and practice, because I don't think nonviolence is a tool for conflict resolution. I think nonviolence is a philosophy for personal transformation. If we don't transform ourselves, if we don't look at all the weaknesses within ourselves and transform those weaknesses into strengths, we will never be good people. One of the things that my grandfather always insisted on was that the education you get in schools is only part of your development process. It's not the only thing that you're going to go. So you are all seniors and you're going to be out of the school next year. But that doesn't mean that your education stops there and that you don't have any other education at all. Your education will begin when you leave the school. What you have learned here is only what your teachers have taught you and what is there in the textbooks. But what you're going to learn outside is lessons from life and from your experiences in life. And if you don't learn those lessons properly and avoid the pitfalls that you're going to come to, because there won't be any teachers there who are going to save you or show you the way there. That is when you are going to have to learn for yourself. And if you fall into those pits, then you ruin your life. But if you are able to avoid those pits, you will be able to make something out of your life. So have an open mind and keep learning every day. I still, now I'm 85 years old, but I still have that open mind. And every person I meet and every experience that I have every day is a lesson for me. I'm learning from it all the time. I'm learning from all of you while I'm here with you. And that can happen only if we have an open mind and are willing to learn from experiences. But if we close our minds and say that I'm done with education when I get out of the school, then you're going to face a lot of problems in life. And many of those problems will just destroy your life. So I hope that you will not destroy your lives, but make something out of your life. Because the purpose of all of us being born today or being alive today is to make this world a little better than we found it by our presence and by our actions. Otherwise, the meaning of life will be nothing. We are not here just to while away our time from birth to death. We are here to make something of this life so that we leave behind a legacy that people can be proud of. So I hope that this small message will give you the hope and the aspirations to do something good out of your life. I see you have a very good beginning already with all these wonderful things that you are doing, and so I leave you now with my blessings and hope that all of you will turn out to be wonderful citizens that this city and eventually this world will be proud of. Thank you. Now, if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
They have posters and posters of questions. They just have to get up the nerve to ask it. I can't wait to see.
Get up? No, I'm not going to eat you up or anything.
Sally.
Who's going first?
What's your question, Sam? No, you must. What? Somebody else go first, then I go.
Okay.
Do you think that your grandfather's nonviolence, like tactics and all that, can help, help right now in the world, like for example, the gun violence and all that? Do you think they'll change anything?
Yes, I think it could, because as I said, nonviolence is not just a tool for conflict resolution, but it is a tool for personal transformation. What we see today, people wanting guns and buying guns and all that, is out of fear. Fear and some people want to dominate over other people, bullies. They are the ones who go and buy these guns and keep them. And if they learn that this is wrong and that we can all live together, we don't need to be afraid of anybody, nobody is coming to steal things from us, then there won't be any need for guns and people will be happy to have good friendship. Yeah.
Around like what time, around like what age did you notice there was like a lot going on in the world and you wanted to be a good inspiration to people and a good change in the world? Around what time was that?
I don't think there was any one particular moment when that happened. I think it was just the fact that I grew up with a family where my parents were very concerned about poverty and about all the pain and anguish in society, and they had devoted their life to trying to help people in some way, all the time. So I grew up in that kind of atmosphere and I don't know if I've ever told you this story, but when I was a young kid, about 3-4 years old, um, the only kids who were my age I could play with were kids of the African agricultural workers uh, who lived in tremendous poverty. They were, exploited by the whites, paid very little, so they were living in little mud huts and they didn't have any clothes to wear or anything. But my parents encouraged me to play with them. They said, you should not look at their poverty or their difficulties. They are human beings, just like you, and you can go and play with them and have fun. But while playing with them, they told me that I have to observe and see how do these people entertain themselves, because they don't have money to buy toys like we do, and we want something, we go to the shop and buy it and have fun. These people don't have that kind of facility, and yet they they live and they grow. So what do they do? How do they make, find something to play with? And while I was with them, I realized that they were making their own toys. Because they couldn't go and buy toys, they would look for things in the garbage and turn those things into toys and play with them. And I learned to play in the same way. And then when I started going to school at the age of 7, my parents said, now, whatever you learn in the school, you have to come home and teach these children also, because they can't go to school. They don't have the money to go to school, but they want education. And so you should share whatever education you get in the school. So every day when I came back from school, whatever I learned there, I would sit with these kids and teach them. And that message got out to people in the whole neighborhood. And I found that parents from as far away as 10 miles would walk with their little kids and bring them to our home and plead with my parents to teach them also. So very soon we had more than 100 kids there, and I couldn't handle all of them myself. So my parents and my sisters and everybody got involved in teaching them. So what this taught us was the need to be aware of the difficulties in society and the need to do something about it. It brought us that compassion, taught us compassion right from childhood. And, some people may not have parents who had that kind of foresight, but it doesn't mean that we can't learn from other people. We can learn from experience, we can learn from other people's experiences, and the thing is that we need to understand that our life should be meaningful, and we should leave behind a small legacy for somebody to be proud of. Yes.
What was your experience like learning from your grandfather?
Like learning from him?
Yeah, learning
I was, 12 years old, very playful 12-year-old. I was more interested in playing than learning. But grandfather had a wonderful way of teaching. He didn't make me sit down and lecture to me. He would just use stories and everyday experiences to turn them into lessons and taught me. And that's why all those lessons have stuck with me and remained with me all these years.
Can you share with them about the spinning wheel, your lesson learned from him, and how you guys had that competition in the letter?
Yeah, one of the things that he did, in India there was a lot of poverty, and although India produced a lot of cotton, the British took all that cotton away to England and made it into cloth, and then they would bring it back to India and sell it at very expensive rates. And so the people in India couldn't buy that expensive cloth. So a lot of the poor people used to be dressed in rags and just, bare minimum clothes. And grandfather said that political freedom will be meaningless as long as we have this economic oppression. And so he found that spinning wheel. He manufactured a spinning wheel which was very simple to operate, and you could turn the cotton into threads and then threads into cloth. And so he enabled the poor people to be self-sufficient in producing their own cloths. And he inspired everybody, even those who were not poor, to spin so that they could give that cotton to the poor people and make cloth for them. So we were, we all learned how to spin. And often when he was telling me stories or something during the hour that he spent with me, we would spin. He was a multitasker. He believed that you don't need to just sit and talk to each other. You can use your hands to do something at the same time. So in meetings like this, when you're listening to somebody talking, all the young people would be sitting on the floor spinning at the same time and producing cloth. So once when we were spinning together, I challenged grandfather and I said, let's see who spins the thinnest threads. And he took up the challenge, and we every day we used to have this competition. And eventually it turned out that I beat him in this. And he wrote a letter to my parents and he said, although I taught Arun how to spin, he beats me now in producing the thinnest threads there. I wish I had remembered to bring that spinning wheel. I could have shown them.
Maybe later in the year you could come back.
Yeah.
How old were you when your grandfather
14. It was a month after I left him and went back to South Africa with my parents that he was assassinated. So it was quite a shock for me. Yes.
Did you think you have to grow up faster than you have than you wanted to grow up?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite.
Do you think that you grew up faster than you wanted to?
Yeah, I guess in some ways I did. But, these are circumstances in life that you can't do anything about, and you have to make the best of it. And so I learned to use it to my advantage, and we can all do that. We don't have to regret what we lost. We have to be thankful for what we gain. If we spend our life regretting what we didn't get, then we'll just be sad all the time. But if we are happy with what little we get and we can transform that into more, that would be a better way of doing things. Yes.
If you were able to have one more conversation with your grandfather, what would the conversation be?
I guess I would speak a lot more about the current politics that's going on all over the world, and how can we, improve politics instead of making it exploiting people and the politics today has become very dirty. It's exploitative and it's all about power, people wanting power, and that is not what it should be. So I would be getting his opinions on that. Yeah.
Despite everything, what is one thing you at least enjoy doing, aside from giving inspirational speeches and all? Like any sports or hobbies?
Well, I do like a lot of tennis. I enjoy tennis. I used to play a lot of tennis. I didn't tell you this story, but when I was a teenager and we had this farm and a lot of land there, and I was very interested in tennis, so one day I asked my parents, I said, can we not build a tennis court here and so that I can play with it? And my parents said, sure, if you can provide the labor. So I said, all right, not knowing what it meant, but I agreed. And so they said, we'll provide you with the expert who knows how to build tennis courts, and you would have to work on it. And that's when I realized that I had bitten more than I could chew. And I got some of my friends to join me, and we spent a whole summer leveling the land and then laying it over with clay and pulling the rollers over it and smoothing it out. It took us, the type of hard labor we had to put in there really was more than we could do, but we were challenged, and so we did it. And we built the tennis court, and then we played on it like crazy. We would start on Saturday morning, all day Saturday and all day Sunday. By the end of Sunday, we couldn't stand up anymore.
You think it was worth it?
Oh yeah, I think it was absolutely worth it. I would do it all over again.
I can relate.
Yeah.
I'm going to add in one more thing about Dr. Gandhi, that he loves to go out to eat. And for 4 years now, I've known him, and I've eaten with him in India, I've eaten with him in South Africa, and I've been on tours where there've been 20 people at the table. And what I respect about him is when you go out to eat, he really expects that personal connection with people. If you're going out to eat, everybody puts their cell phone away. And it is expected. And if you don't put your cell phone away, you're going to get called out. Right?
Yeah.
I will be going.
So it's a
Yeah.
lesson that I learned from
Because that's a little time that we have to talk and, be relate to each other. And if we are stuck on our cell phones all the time, I mean, it's painful when I see uh, people sitting across each other and they're texting each other instead of talking with them.
That's just sad. I'd be more focused on eating, to be honest.
Yeah.
When your grandfather told you to search for the pencil to teach you the lesson about violence against nature, did this help you realize the sincerity and importance behind his lessons?
Not at that moment. At that moment, I was in my mind cursing him. What is he making me look for this pencil? And it seemed so ridiculous, because everybody on the road said, "What did you lose? Are you looking for something precious you lost?" And when I tell them, "No, a little pencil," and they would laugh at me. "You looking for a little pencil?" Yeah. So at that moment, it felt very ridiculous. But then when I understood the purpose of that lesson, I realized how important it was.
In your book, I read a part and it said that you were scared to put your identity out because you might be discriminated. How did you feel about that?
Not scared of identity, because in South Africa they discriminated on basis of color. So if you were not white, you were black. It didn't matter where you came from. So it didn't matter whether I was a Gandhi or not, or related to a Gandhi. It was just my color was not good enough for them, and so I was discriminated.
In your latest book, you wrote about how your grandfather said that after his death, his cost would be anyone else's cost, no one would take their cost. Do you think you've done a good job at making his cost other people's cost?
I think I've tried to do as good as I can understand it to be, and as much as I can as a single person. But there's pretty big, there's so many problems in the world, and I don't have the capacity to solve all of them. But even if I can solve a few of them in some way, or make a difference in somebody's life, that's worth it. We sometimes get hung up with the idea that we want to change the whole world. And then when we realize that we don't have the capacity to change the whole world, we don't do anything at all. We get so despondent that we say, well, if I can't change the world, why waste my time? But if we start changing people around us and, making a little difference in our neighborhood, the world will eventually change too. So you have to set yourself goals that you can achieve. When you set yourself a goal that you can't achieve, you then can get disheartened very quickly.
If you were to go back to India today, what change would you see?
Sorry?
If you were to be able to go back to India today, what change would you see?
If I went to India? Well, every year I go to India, and the thing that strikes me is that we make a lot of economic change, and the rich seem to get richer, but the poor are always poor, and I feel very hurt about that. And that's why I think in this little way of rescuing these kids and giving them education is a small way of changing their lives and making it a little better than otherwise. But this is happening all over the world, not just in India. That the rich get richer and the poor remain poor. In fact, they become poorer than they were. And that disparity goes on. And sometimes in moments of despondency, I feel that this is deliberately done, because poverty now seems to be the modern day of slavery. In the old days, we could enslave people and get work done from them. Now we have people who live in poverty, and we make them work at cheaper rates, and you know, um, so it's a kind of modern day slavery.
Kind of two in one. Number one, do you still hate eggs? And two, because you go out and eat with people such as Parko, what has your favorite dish been that you've eaten so far?
I don't hate eggs anymore. I didn't like the omelette that I was given the first day I ate eggs. Uh, Somehow the taste wasn't good enough for me. But now I've learned to enjoy eggs and omelets. And my favorite food when I go out to eat is chicken tikka masala. It's an Indian dish, chicken tikka masala. Yes.
I've always wanted to ask this, because you've been here 4 years now. We often think of historic figures and stuff as always being on point and working very hard. Did your grandfather have any humorous side, did he play any jokes on you or anything like that? Because that's not a side that we would have.
Oh yeah, he did have a sense of humor, and he joked around a lot with people, and but he was very uh, he was very conscious of time management. He didn't believe in killing time or wasting time. He said we don't have the luxury to waste time. We have to be, use every minute properly. So when I was living with him, he made me plan out my whole day. From the time I got up in the morning till the time I went to bed, every hour had to be properly accounted for, which included playtime and fun time. But it had to be accounted for, and you had to be able to use that time effectively. And he did it in his own life. I mean, you can imagine he was uh, leading a whole movement for independence, and um, he had to guide all the people, from all the leaders and the common people, and so many letters from foreign people coming, and all of these things that sometimes overwhelm us. But he was able to do everything. And the wonderful thing was that he never got secretaries to write replies to people. He wrote handwritten notes to every one of them. Even if it was just one sentence, he would say, "Received your letter, thank you very much." And another beauty of his was, and I used to experience this because he used to get sacks full of mail, 4 or 5 sacks full of mail every day. And I had to, with other people also, we had to open all that mail, but open it carefully, not just tear the envelopes apart, but open the envelopes carefully, because he wrote his replies on those envelopes and put them back again and sent it back. So he didn't want to waste any paper at all. So, it had to be a very careful operation. But he wrote, what I was saying is that he wrote everything himself in his own handwriting.
So if you didn't follow in his footsteps, what would you be doing right now?
I'm sorry?
If you didn't follow in his footsteps, what would you be doing right now?
What I would be doing right now is what I'm doing right now. I think I'm trying to follow in his footsteps as much as possible. I don't think I would be able to fill the shoes completely, because that needs a lot of sacrifice, and I just don't have that capacity. But you know what I'm doing, I'm quite happy with that. Yeah.
Does anyone else in your family give speeches also about what he did or encourages people to follow him?
Yeah, my son goes out. My daughter also goes and speaks in the schools here in Rochester. She speaks to the younger group, middle schools and so on. And my son does it in India, and my couple of my cousins also do it. They share their own experiences. Yeah.
The new tallest statue in the world, the Statue of Unity, is located in India, and it also depicts a man who was widely influenced by the philosophy of Gandhi. What are your thoughts about it?
I am against statues. I'm against building of statues, and I think it's a waste of money when we need money for the poor people and to have programs for poor people. I don't see the justification for spending $400 million to erect a statue of one person when there are millions of people who are dying of hunger. Yeah.
How long have you been in Rochester?
I've been in Rochester 12 years. Before that, I was in Memphis, Tennessee for 14 years. And before that, I was in Oxford, Mississippi for 4 years. Yeah.
Have you ever owned a TV like when you were younger? And if you have you ever heard of Martin Luther King? How do you feel about it?
I heard of Martin Luther King when he came to India in 1959. You didn't know that?
I know that.
Yeah. Well, when the Montgomery bus boycott took place in 1959, you heard about that?
I don't think so.
Well, there was one day Rosa Parks, who was a seamstress, and she was going back home and she was very tired, and she went and got into the bus and sat in the front rows. And when some white people came to, in those days the law was that the African Americans had to sit at the back, right at the back of the bus. I think 3 or 4 rows at the back were reserved for them. The rest of the bus was for whites. Well, she sat in a white seat, and when she was asked to get up from there, she refused. So I'm not getting up, I'm too tired. And so that sparked off a lot of things. The police came and they tried to, then other people joined the thing, and very soon it became a big issue. And then the African American community in Montgomery, Alabama, decided to boycott the buses. And at that time, Dr. Martin Luther King had just been appointed as a pastor of a church in Montgomery. And he was, he wasn't a prominent leader or anything. He had just come out of college, and this was his first assignment. And he was worried about how he's going to, make it a successful assignment. And then suddenly, one day, this whole issue of boycotting the buses fell in his lap, and he had to take the leadership of it. And that bus boycott went on for nearly 200 days or something. They refused to, the African people used to walk to work and back again. Then many of the African people and some white sympathizers also would carpool and take them home every day, those who had cars. So that bus boycott was the first action that the African American people took against prejudice in this country. And when the government of India heard about this being so close to what Gandhi would have done in the circumstances, they invited Dr. King and his family and some of the African leaders to come to India and learn more about nonviolence and things from people who had lived with grandfather. So he came in 1959 and spent a whole month there going around and speaking to people who had participated in the Indian freedom struggle. And at the end of it, he declared that he now felt spiritually strong enough to come back to the US and lead the civil rights movement. At that time, I was in India as a young journalist, and I knew about him. And
We have time for one more question. And Davey has a
yeah, the lady at the back there.
50 years from now, where do you see your grandfather teaching?
A year from now. Did you?
50 years from now.
Oh, 50 years from now. I hope that all of you will carry on the legacy. That is why I am here today, to plant seeds in your minds and hope that the lessons I learned from grandfather and the way I've been motivated to carry on his work, that you will be motivated in the same way and you will carry on the work and make this world a better place. So 50 years from now, I'll be looking from up there somewhere to see what you have done.
Okay, let's give him a round of applause. Thank you for your great questions too. It really added to
Yeah.
the whole conversation and presentation today. Could you tell they've been reading your book
Mm-hmm.
and studying? You could tell?
Yeah.
What grade would you give them?
A.
A? Not A plus?
No.
No.
Not good enough for
A's
the
pretty
class.
good.
A plus is when they put it into practice.
They put it into practice. Well, maybe you could come back at the end and see
Yeah.
how they put it into practice. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is, I know some people have books for him to sign. Before we get to the book signing, we're gonna take a group, photo. Okay, for you to always share. But before we get to the photo, we're gonna do something else. We have a young lady here who speaks 5 languages,
Wow.
and she did something pretty remarkable for you.
Mm-hmm.
Sama, come on. This is Sama, and why don't you get your surprise for him?
Oh, wow.
What do you think?
Great.
How do you look?
Great.
How do you look?
Well, I wish I was as thin as they.
That's pretty impressive, isn't it? She loves art, and she did this all on her own. So she wrote it.
Wonderful.
I didn't even really know she was doing it. How many? 9 hours.
Wow, that's wonderful.
She wanted you to have that.
Thank you very much.
Okay?
Mhm.
Okay, let's.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. And then we'll take a group shot. So if everybody would leave your things and your chairs, and just let's all come up front. We'll make like a big couple different rows. You could stay right there. They'll come around you.
Okay.
You okay?
Yeah?
Okay. I'll hold this. I'll give this to you.
I think all the short people should stand in the back so block. Let's all block away. Stand in the back, right next to Mom. I'm about to get right next to Bro. Watch out. Watch out.
What we're gonna do is we'll put some chairs down front. Can you guys all grab a chair here? And we'll leave the clipboard to the side.
Stop throwing. She don't want you next to him.
down.
Here's another chair.
Why you in the front?
How about down here?
That should be the whole lot, like that's his mental. Let Shania in front of you. Come on, Shania.
Okay, head behind me. There you go. You're blocking the view.
Come on, Brett. They take it too long. Shania, why you going in front?
I can't. She's embarrassed.
Push in a little bit.
Thank you.
Oh, you took. She took like 9.
We good? We have some good ones? We're good? Okay. If you have a book for him to sign, you can hang out here. We're going to put the clipboards in the bin, and your hand